Hello, good evening. Thank you for coming. My name's Adam Menard. I'm the Auburn Town Planner. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. First off, about the grant. This is a starting point for the town to begin the process of planning for climate change resiliency. Auburn is to be a certified community and we're eligible for many different grants, including the Municipal Vulnerability Planning Grant, as well as I'll give bonus points to several other grants, including MassWorks. A couple of years ago, Governor Baker signed an Executive Order 569. This order was enacted to establish an integrated climate change strategy for the Commonwealth. This authorized $1.4 billion to be spent statewide to combat climate change. The state, through the Executive Office of Environmental and Energy Affairs, awards communities with funding to complete vulnerability assessments and develop action-oriented resiliency plans. It's a substantial push by the Commonwealth to address climate change. Last summer, the governor signed legislation allocating $75 million for the municipal grant action programs. And as part of a larger initiative, he signed $2.6 billion into law. So the MVP planning objectives, it's to define extreme weather, natural and climate-related hazards, identify existing and future vulnerability and strengths, develop and prioritize actions for the community and broader stakeholder networks, and to identify opportunities for the community to advance action to reduce risks and build resilience. So this is just a picture from the workshop, kind of a sky view of the attendees taking part in the day. It was an eight-hour workshop. It was an all-day event that took place on the 28th. There were 27 participants, as well as 6 facilitators from the Blackstone Watershed Association, from Mass Audubon, and from the Nature Conservancy. There were also 4 high school students that served as scribes. So the town was provided climate change data that was developed by the Northeast Climate Science Center at UMass Amherst. The Climate Science Center is a part of a federal network of 8 climate science centers created to work with natural and cultural resource managers to gather scientific information and build the tools needed to help fish, wildlife, and ecosystems adapt to the impacts of climate change. There were several scenarios that were run that dealt with the climate change data that they provided. There are medium and high emission scenarios. Were chosen. The medium scenario assumed that peak emissions would hit at mid-century, and the high emission scenario assumed emissions would peak towards the end of the century, just giving us 2 sets of data to work with. So, in most areas of the Northeast Midwest, the heaviest 1% of all storms are typically around 1.75 inches, about 2 inches in a 24-hour period. This is the strong storms that have increased by 55% since 1958. The temperature has also been getting a lot warmer. Probably one of the more noticeable items is the growing season. It's been extended 15 days since 1950. As well as sea level rise, which has risen almost a foot since 1922. So some of the projected changes developed by Northeast Climate Center show that temperature in Auburn could be increased by 7.2 degrees by the end of the century. 90-degree days, hot days during the summer could dramatically increase to 34. Currently, the average about 4 to 5 days of degrees above 90 per year, but 34 would be a very large difference. And sea level rise is expected to continue to increase, and 2-inch precipitation days, those days with heavy rainstorms, are expected to increase by another 47%. So again, the goal of the MVP workshop, it was to start the process of building resiliency against these climate threats. So there are several specific threats identified at the workshop that Auburn faces. This includes flooding and extreme precipitation. That's a picture of the Auburn High School fields flooding, took place about 10 years ago. Snow and ice storms, which we're all used to, these will continue to be a problem. And ice storms, like this past winter, in my opinion, seem to be there's a lot more ice storms and snowstorms. These require a different response to a regular snowstorm. Heat and drought, these are expected to increase, so longer droughts, like we had a few years ago in 2016. And high winds. There's been several high windstorms just very recently. These are expected to continue to be a problem, damaging trees and power lines and buildings. So that's a picture of our climate kind of shifting south. Now our climate currently is about where New Jersey is. So it's a little bit warmer than it was historically, and if the climate predictions are expected to continue, we'll be more like a South Carolina climate, which would be a much, much different way of living for us. So several areas of concern were identified at the workshop, include the vulnerable drinking water supplies, wells, and aquifer. These are always a concern. These where we get our water. Certainly priority to protect this. Flood-prone areas and infrastructure are a concern. Major interstate, state highways and aging infrastructure and complex intersections were all identified as an area of concern. Dispersed, elderly, and vulnerable residents and active freight rail lines and operations are all areas of concern we want to keep an eye on. At the workshop, we discussed strengths, weaknesses, and priorities. And they fell into three different categories: infrastructure, societal, environmental. Auburn has many different strengths as well as weaknesses, and these are all items that we tried to address at the workshop. So for infrastructure, Sword Street culverts were addressed as a priority. Build a town-owned fueling station. One of the strategies was to design and build a facility on town-owned property that would include a backup generator, which the current arrangement with a private vendor for our gas doesn't currently allow. Evaluate the backup power systems at critical town facilities. So looking at the police station, the fire stations, the schools, the emergency shelters. We want to make sure that if we do lose power, that these facilities can stay open and can handle the response that needs to be handled at that time. Assess the vulnerability of the power transmission. Again, this is a high priority. We all like our electricity, but we want to keep it on. So a strategy was to evaluate trees for proximity to power lines and tree health, and look into moving some power lines underground and include a cost analysis. Moving the power lines underground is an expensive proposition, but in certain places that might be worthwhile. Societal strengths and weaknesses and priorities. Review the evacuation planning and housing bylaws. The strategy for this was to plan with all stakeholders, just senior and disabled residents, evacuation, including transportation needs, to coordinate with the assisted living facilities in town, the nursing homes and group homes, and make sure their evacuation plans are up to date. And also to update bylaws to promote multifamily, mixed uses, and nature-based green infrastructure approaches for stormwater runoff and for open space. So we should continue to improve communication. I know this is a high priority for the town, make sure we all communicate with the residents and interdepartmentally. Should improve communication about emergencies, power outages, extreme events, focus on reaching seniors and other vulnerable residents, not only in residential facilities and housing complexes, but also for those across town. And another priority was mixed use and nature-based infrastructure approaches. Should increase. So this is just nature-based and green infrastructure, basically using nature, using the water to our benefit and not to our disadvantage. Let's see. The last category we discussed was environmental issues. Protect and improve the water quality and quantity. This could include updating zoning bylaws to encourage low-impact development and green infrastructure based on the maps and delineation. Develop rules and regulations for existing bylaws, including regulations to implement stormwater requirements. We should review water quality bylaws and revise them if necessary. Create an overlay of water bodies and catch basin areas, address salt use, and the illicit discharge detention and elimination plan. Another priority or strategy is to hire an engineer to focus on stormwater regulations enforcement, including the NIFTY's permits, and coordinate with MassDOT to improve drainage on state roads and highways. We could also purchase equipment to make and distribute brine as an alternative for ice control on roads to protect with the water supply. And we can evaluate other low-impact methods of ice control on roads. So now that the workshop's over, and we're having this listening session, some of the next steps will be to submit the final report to EOEA, which is in the Executive Office of Environmental and Energy Affairs, or Energy and Environmental Affairs. I really don't remember which E goes first. Annual report, there's an annual report to ensure that resilience is a community priority by incorporating MVP results into local comprehensive planning, grant applications, budgets, capital projects, and policies. By being certified as an MVP community, it really is an asset for the town, making the town eligible for further grant funding and giving us bonus points for some other grant programs like MassWorks. We'll be actively seeking these grant fundings when they become available. We'll work to implement policy and change bylaws where deemed appropriate, and update existing plans, including the currently underway master plan update. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
I didn't hear anything about solar, use of solar panels or anything like that.
Well, solar is an important use. That's certainly a way to lower emissions. This is more of a planning guide, not necessarily actively recommending strategies, but this is more developing town-specific actions. Is there something specific with the solar you were looking to the town to work on?
I would think that you would be encouraging more use of solar.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think solar is important. The strategy is why I dealt more for specific actions that the town could take. So I'm not sure offhand where we could, that's something we could look into, is for having solar for the town facilities, town-owned property. Certainly something to look at. Anybody else? No, okay. If you want, there's a map, a base map that we use at the workshop over to my right. If anybody would like to take a look at it, please do. Kind of shows what we had to work with. I also have a draft of the report that's going to be submitted to the state. It'll probably be submitted about a month or so. It's due by end of June, but we'll probably submit it earlier than that. So that's it. Thank you.